Yes. Welcome to the Motherhood and podcast, where we talk about motherhood and everything in between, because we are not just mothers. Today we are talking about Anna's birth story. I guess I should introduce ourselves. My name is Sophia, and this is Anna, and we are the two co-hosts of the podcast. But yeah, today we're talking about Anna's birth story, and I'll be asking her, we're not going to go too far in her journey, just the birth, because that could be a whole conversation. But before we get into it, how was your week? I know it was Passover, and you celebrate that, so how was your week?
It was good. We had our Passover dinner last night. We had a few friends over from church to celebrate with us. It was the first time that they had Passover, and I think this is, I want to say, like the 5th year that me and my husband have done it. I think it was 2020 when we started, so 2021, 22, 3, 4. Yeah, this would be the 5th year. And it's looked different for us every year. I think this year was the most formal that we've done it, but we had a really nice dinner, and we did the Haggadah, or the telling of the Passover story, and some fun little things along the way. We had a really good time, and it's just a beautiful celebration of the remembrance of God being faithful to bring the children of Israel out of Egypt when they were in bondage, and then also him coming to fulfill that very same thing, and become our Passover lamb as the Christ, the Messiah, and he died for our sins, and now we can be free from sin because of that. So it's a really beautiful celebration that we enjoy doing every year, and just lots of fun. So that was my yesterday, but other than that, not anything super exciting for the rest of my week. My son ended up with a black eye 30 minutes before we started recording, so trying to calm him down physically and my nerves. Feeling a little bit flustered before we got up here. Something fell in his eye, cut him open, and so now he has a not cute little black eye, which thankfully happened today because we took family pictures 2 days ago, and I was already worried because he had scraped up his knee, and then I had accidentally cut him on the lip with my thumbnail, and I was all stressed because the photographer was going to have to edit that out of the pictures, which wasn't that big of a deal, and she already sent me a sneak peek. You've also seen them. They're so cute. So excited about them. Can't wait to get their back. But yeah, it would have been a lot more work for her to have edited a black eye off of the baby. So glad that happened today. It's inevitable. It happens with kids, but still stressful whenever it does. So, but how has your week been?
Good. It's been a lot of at home without my husband, so that's made me kind of depressed. I don't know. I like having the routine. Say that again.
His new job, right?
Yes. So his new job is fine. The work hours are fine, but because of how the timeline happened of him moving jobs and bills in between those times, we are needing to catch up. So he is working an extra job. So he's working all week, just for the next week and a half, until we catch up. So that's been hard. But I've been cleaning and baking chocolate sourdough that actually turned out better this time.
It looked beautiful. I was so excited whenever you sent me the picture because it was gorgeous.
Thank you. I think that's the best loaf I've ever done, because I've done regular loaves before, but I've never had one like poof up that much. So I was excited about that. Yeah, we're actually following a meal plan this week. I think you are as well. But since we last talked about our previous episode, we're actually sticking to the meal plan. Partly because I made one, and partly because we have to, because we don't have any money to go out. So other than Christian being gone all the time, it's been really good. Been trying to keep myself busy. But enough about me. So I don't want to have you go too far back, because I know your consumption story could be a whole 2-hour podcast in and of itself. So maybe just start like how you found out you were pregnant and how you told your husband, and if you made it like a surprise. Did you take a test? Did you just know?
I think we discussed on our very first episode when we were doing the Meet the Host how we both, thought we would just know, and I definitely did not just know. Let's see. So he was conceived in August of 2022, and I guess kind of like the very beginning of his story is I had been experiencing, I wouldn't necessarily call it infertility, but I had had 2 previous pregnancies. I had got pregnant in July of both 2019 and 2020. And the first one ended in a miscarriage that effectively I was pregnant until 25 weeks. The baby was only developed. And then July of 2020, I got pregnant again. And neither of those times were planned. I had a lot of misunderstanding about fertility awareness at that time in my life, and so I thought I knew what I was doing, didn't really, and not to say that we weren't open and welcoming to having a child at any time. We definitely believe that children are a blessing of the Lord, and that all children are worthy of life and being here, and so any children that God would bless us with, we are, welcoming with open arms. But we weren't actively trying. And so both of the times that we got pregnant. And then so the second time in 2020, it ended up being an ectopic pregnancy. That because of everything that we had gone through in the year before that, I had it medically managed. I just kind of wanted to disassociate from it and not have to emotionally deal with it. And so, so that was my first 2 pregnancies. And then, between the time of July 2020, when I got pregnant the second time, and August 2022, whenever I got pregnant with my son, we on and off tried actively and then did not try actively, but we're leaving it open to it. And there were many months based on my tracking that I knew that we should have conceived, and that we did not. And so, I never labeled myself as infertile, but I definitely would have told you at that time in my life that I was struggling to get pregnant, which I think is true. And so by the time that I got pregnant with my son, Rowan, I had basically kind of just gotten to the point where I was like, well, I believe that, God can definitely do that. He can work miracles for women who are struggling and they can get pregnant. I believe that, but I don't know that I necessarily believe that for myself anymore. Maybe that's just not what he wants for me. So I had hope for other people, but not for myself. And in about 2 weeks after I said that to a friend, sitting over dinner, about 2 weeks later, we had a minister come to our church, and he preached this message talking about the natural phenomenon where you can cut down a tree and leave a stump behind, and the stump of the tree will die, but the roots will still be alive underground. And if you water the stump, the roots will begin to grow shoots of a new tree out of the dead stump. And so from this death, there becomes new life. And so at the end of his sermon, he had asked everyone in the congregation who felt like they had this stump, this dead thing in their life, to get up and to walk around the church, like as an act of faith, as if you were spiritually walking around your stump and you are watering it with your tears and with your prayer, that God would bring forth something new out of, whatever season of death that you were in. And I began to walk around the church in faith, just believing, because I knew for me that it was my journey with fertility, that I was my dead stump. And I had only ever met this minister one other time, very briefly. Like, he doesn't know anything about me. And at one point he came over to me and he began praying for me, and he just began speaking over and over and over again. Oh my goodness. Well, I just lost it. The womb that was dead, God will put a spirit of life in it. And he just spoke that over and over and over again. And so, I felt like God was speaking directly to me in that moment. And then I realized a couple days later that in the pre-service prayer of that service, I had gotten down on my knees at my pew and I had specifically asked God to give me a word about my fertility. And I had forgotten I had even prayed that before the service began. And then he preached this message, and then this minister came and effectively prophesied over me and said that God would give a spirit of life. The womb that was once dead, God will put a spirit of life in it. And so walking out of that service, I was like on a high. And then later that evening, me and my husband got a text from our pastor, who had forwarded to us a message from the minister. He had sent him this and said, "Hey, I want you to send this text to the couple." So our pastor forwarded it to us, and it said something to the effect of continue to water your stump in faith and go out and buy things like baby clothes and a crib. And he listed, baby items. It's that God would be faithful to see it through. And so not only did he say that in the service, he sends us this message later that is very specific about going out and buying baby items. And so the next day, whenever I was at work, I was working a corporate job at the time. And so on my lunch break, I went to this little hobby boutique store down the road, and they had little baby clothes and stuff. And so I bought a set of bibs, and I think I bought a baby outfit, and I brought it home. And it was this cow print bib, and it was just super cute. And I was like, look what I got for the baby. And, so me and my husband were really feeling confident about that. Well, the crux of the matter was that based on my cycle, I would have been ovulating the night of that service. So I was like, we gotta go home straight from church and we gotta do something about this. And we also had company over at the time. So we missed our window of opportunity, to say the least. And I was like, okay, next month, we got it. Like, we're on top of it next month. And 9 days later, I ended up getting I can't even remember why I took another one. But for some reason, 9 days after what I thought would have been my ovulation window, and that I had, like, LH ovulation strip test confirming, I felt impressed to take another ovulation test. And so at that point in my cycle, if you know anything about fertility awareness, I should have been luteal phase, getting closer to my menstrual cycle. But 9 days after what I thought was my ovulation, I felt impressed to take another LH test, because I was seeing bodily signs that I was ovulating again. And so I took another test and it was positive. And so we made it happen. And I was not feeling really confident about it because, like, it was way later in my cycle than it should have been. Like, that's not when I should have ovulated. And I had already confirmed it earlier before. And so I just kind of was like, whatever, we'll see what happens. 13 days after I took that second ovulation test, I took a pregnancy test before I left for work in the morning. And my husband had told me years before, whenever we were early into our fertility journey, he was like, you need to quit taking pregnancy tests without me. Because he's like, then you know before I know. And so almost all of them I had taken with him there. But that one, I was just like so confident that it was going to be negative. I just took it by myself and I was like, whatever, it'll be fine. And so then I flip it over a couple minutes later and there's 2 lines. And I had not seen 2 lines in over 2 years. And so I like walk across the hall into his office because he worked from home. And I just like sat down beside him and just showed it. Like, I didn't even say anything. I just showed it to him. And he looked at me, he's like, why'd you take it without me? And so he was upset because I took it without him. But I was, just astonished because I couldn't believe that it was positive. And so it was this really weird, like, it was serendipitous, but also it was hard to believe. Like, we knew, like, we could see it was a positive pregnancy test. There were 2 lines, but we were both so confused, like, how did that even happen? Like, it should not have really been possible. And so we're just kind of looking at each other like, okay, I guess I'm pregnant. And so I had to leave for work. It was, this weird, like, kind of excited but confused tension. And I had to leave and he was staying home. So I left for work, and then, we eventually came to terms with the fact that, yes, I was pregnant, in fact. But that was me finding out. I don't have it on video or anything like that. But yeah, that was me finding out that I was expecting. And looking back, I think whenever I told my dad the story of his conception, or not my dad's conception, of my son's conception, but when I told my dad, he pointed out that it was 9 days after both when I thought I ovulated the first time and whenever that minister had given that prophecy. And it was 9 days between when he prophesied that and when we conceived. And in Hebrew numerology, there's, numbers mean things, individual letters mean things in the Hebrew. But in Hebrew numerology, that's a hard word, the number 9 means new beginnings. And I just thought that was like such a confirmation of what the Lord had done in that whole situation. And so that's just a cool little tidbit of information that I hold on to the Bible says that Mary held these things in her heart. I feel like I hold these things in my heart, that like the Lord was just specific in all the ways that he was a part of the conception of our son.
Mm-hmm. And so after you found out, did you seek care at the time? Because I know you're a big advocate of physiological birth now, and you haven't had a free birth, but you are open to free birth. So where did you first go when you found out? Did you go like to the hospital? Did you go to a midwife? Like, where was your thoughts at as soon as you found out?
Yeah, so hospital was never an option for me. At the time, I don't even want to say that I had heard of free birth. And home birth was all that I personally knew. My mom had all 6 of her children at home. And my older sister, who had already had 2 kids at the time, she had had both of her kids at home. I had attended both of her births. I was around for my 3 younger siblings whenever they were born at home. So that is the environment that I have been raised in. And I feel very blessed to like have been a part of that and like had that, I want to say jump start necessarily, but like have that knowledge probably earlier than most women who have chosen home birth. I had that earlier in my life, the exposure to that. And I actually, from the time that I was about 3/4 of the way through my college degree, my bachelor's, I had decided that I wanted to pursue midwifery myself. And so at the time I had only been a part of midwife assisted births. And I wanted to pursue, like, when I say traditional midwifery, for me at the time, that meant medicalized midwifery, but not in like a nurse route, like a certified nurse midwife, but the direct entry midwife, but trained to do all of the medical things and yada yada. So I had already, I had been taking classes at that time. I had been supporting women in birth as a doula already, and so I had been taking classes for midwifery. I had been certified in neonatal resuscitation, things like that, and like CPR, starting to get like my early certifications to head that route. And so because we had, in my very first pregnancy, we had really early on sought out a midwife because we knew like they book up really quickly. We very quickly got a midwife. We saw her for several appointments. She was very present with us through the course of my miscarriage. And I am still very grateful for her guidance and her experience to this day. Even from just, a woman-to-woman experience, because she had personally gone through that before as well. And so being able to connect with another woman over that while you're walking through that experience, I am very grateful for. But because of that, I know people like to throw this term around, but I think I was, in a way, trauma bonded to her, having gone through that miscarriage with her by my side, which ultimately I miscarried at home by myself. I, effectively free birthed my baby at home. But she was there, through all of that. And so I just like the reasonable action, like course of action for me whenever I got pregnant this time around was to seek out her, as a provider. And so pretty quickly I texted her and I was like, hey, I'm expecting again. I would love for you to be my midwife. And that was just the immediate course of action. I never went to a hospital the entire time that I was pregnant with him. But I did have one ultrasound, I think in like 8 weeks. Because even though I don't personally advocate for ultrasounds, there was something like mentally that having experienced 2 losses by that point, I like needed the reassurance to, you know, my anxiety was building. I needed the reassurance to know that this baby is alive. And so we got an ultrasound done in 8 weeks, and then we didn't do anything beyond that point. So yeah, to answer your question.
Okay. So how did your appointments go with the midwife? Like, what did y'all... You said you only had 1 ultrasound. Did y'all use, like, the Doppler at all? Like, how would your appointments go throughout the pregnancy? Sorry.
Yeah, so I know it kind of... it sounds, I guess, probably kind of hypocritical because Doppler technology is ultrasound, but commonly most people refer to ultrasound as like the one that you go that you can see the screen, and so that we got that kind of ultrasound done at 8 weeks, and then I think from like 10 or 12 weeks moving forward, I had an appointment with her like every 4 weeks, so like once a month, and she would use the Doppler, which is, you know, small ultrasound, portable ultrasound, for like a minute, just to check the heart rate, which, personally, I wouldn't say I really have an objection to it. You know, if it makes you feel more comfortable, then that's fine. For me at the time, it definitely did, because of the situation and what we had gone through before. Being able to audibly hear the heartbeat really gave me a lot of reassurance, up until the point where I could feel him moving. Beyond that point, he let me know a lot that he was there and that he was fine, because he was kicking me in all sorts of places. But yeah, so our appointments were pretty simple. Because I had worked with her before, I felt very comfortable with her. And she would like check my fetal height, you know, with a measuring tape, and then she'd listen for like a minute on the Doppler, and then we'd talk about, you know, how I was doing, how I was feeling, you know, if there was any like new things that had come up, if I was experiencing any particular symptoms, and if there was, you know, like if I was having really bad indigestion or something, she'd maybe give me a supplement recommendation or, you know, things like that. But they were very straightforward, and I would say there was never anything really that in an appointment she told me, like, it wasn't like she was telling me like, oh, this is what is happening. It was like, I already know what's happening. I'm just telling you how I'm doing so you can put this in your notes. That's basically what our appointments looked like up until about 36 weeks, I want to say. Because at 30, then they go to every 2 weeks, and then at 36, they go to every week up until delivery. And there was a couple things in our last few appointments that I remember driving away and calling my husband on the phone and being like, this is like, it would get under my skin, like the things that she would say. And I think it's because as I approached birth, I knew that I didn't want her there. Because it was about halfway through the pregnancy that I had come to like I had been hearing about free birth, and I had been introduced to, you know, unassisted birth. And as soon as I heard about it and I like saw these videos, I was like, well, duh. I mean, obviously, that's the way that it's supposed to be. Like, this is what actually makes sense. You know, I'm on this like course for midwifery, not just in my pregnancy, but in my like career journey. And this is actually how I want to support women. Like, I don't want to be the one with the gloved hands touching the baby and the mom and doing all the things. Like, I want to be there, you know, watching you and making sure that you're taken care of, that you've got food, you've got water, and then like making sure that everything's in order for you to just be able to have a baby after, because that's about all that needs to be done. Which is why I took a big pivot in the way that I care for women now, as a birth keeper. Yeah.
That's awesome. So what, I guess you could get into like some of the specific things she was saying. Was she like, did she use the classic term like once you hit 40 weeks, like, oh, we just need to get things going, or it's just gonna be a little check, or like, oh, we need to get things moving along?
She didn't, which is actually kind of surprising. And I had made it very clear with her early on, and then later, closer to time, I reestablished. I was like, hey, I don't want cervical checks. I don't want you to even talk to me about 42 weeks. Like, let's not even do that, okay? But whenever I got to, I think about, it was like 36 or 37 weeks. And I gained weight kind of weirdly in my pregnancy. So like the first trimester, I gained probably like 20 pounds. And I gained weight really fast because that first trimester hormones hit my boobs and my butt really hard. And so like very voluptuous the entire time I was pregnant. It was a challenge between my boobs and my belly on who could like grow the furthest. So like every time my belly would get bigger, then my boobs would like grow to match it. And it was just like constantly this growth the whole time. Yeah, they were massive. They were just huge. So I gained a lot of weight in the first trimester and then in the second trimester. So like by halfway through, I think I had gained like 30 pounds. And the baby does the majority of its growing in the later weeks of pregnant, like the last 10 to 12 weeks. So I think she was expecting that, you know, I should continue to be getting heavier as the pregnancy progressed, but my body stalled out and I only gained like 5 more pounds. Okay, I'm just going to throw this out there for anybody watching this video recording. If you see a thumbs up on the thing, whatever new update Apple has done, if you put a thumbs up, it does this little bubble. And I don't know how to turn that off in my settings. That's so obnoxious. I noticed when I was editing last week that it recorded that into the podcast.
Yeah.
I'll do it. Let's see. Will it do the heart thing? There we go.
You're so much better at it.
I'll give y'all some time.
Computer, so it's not going to work.
Yeah, I don't know why it does that. I'm going to have to figure out how to turn that setting off. But anyway, yeah, so I gained a lot of my weight at the first half, and then my body stalled out, and I basically only gained 5 more pounds for the rest of the pregnancy. So it was just the weight of the baby that I gained. And so I gained like right at 35 overall, but I think probably like I lost a little bit of weight those last, you know, probably 10 or 12 weeks as the baby was gaining weight. And so it like just kind of stayed the same. And so at around 36 weeks, whenever she did my fundal height, she was like, well, and if you don't know what a fundal height is, for those listening, I say this in air quotes because it is not an exact science by any means. But if you measure the fundal height in centimeters from the pubic bone to the top of the fundus, which is the top of the uterus, it should, quote unquote, correspond to the number of weeks of pregnancy in centimeters. So like 37 centimeters for 37 weeks pregnant. But that is extremely variable because women have different body sizes. Women have different sized babies. There's just so many different factors. So it's not an exact science at all. But around that time, she was like, well, you're measuring like a couple weeks small. And I'm a taller than average woman, but I am very petite. I have a very small rib cage and a small waist. And so she was, telling me like, well, you're measuring a couple weeks small. She's like, we might just want to do an ultrasound just to make sure everything's okay. And I had already told her like, yes, I know, like I said, hypocritical. We were doing Doppler, but I had told her like I did not want to do any more ultrasounds over the course of my pregnancy. So we're getting close to the end, and she's suggesting doing ultrasound. And I was like, no, I'm really good. I feel very confident in the way that this baby is growing inside of me. Like, I can tell he's growing, or I didn't know what the baby was. I can tell the baby is growing. And I had also could feel that he was starting to drop lower, which causes your fundus to be shorter, which would make sense why I would be measuring a little bit smaller. And she's like, well, we're just going to monitor it. And so the next week I came back and it had not grown. It hadn't gotten smaller, but it had stayed the same. But I was another week along. And she was like, well, it hasn't really changed. So like, there's this test that we can do. It's not an ultrasound, but like we can do it with this machine or whatever. I can't even remember what, I know what the test is, but I can't think of the name of it right now. And basically she was, trying to insinuate that I could have had intrauterine growth restriction, and that the baby was not growing properly, toward the end of the pregnancy. And, she's like, I just really want you to consider it, because if that really is the case, then blah, 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 blah. And she's like, if you don't feel comfortable with the ultrasound, then we can do this instead. And I'm just, looking at her like, I know what's going on with this baby that's in my body, and there's nothing wrong. And, and there's no reason for me to be getting these tests done. And so, I can't remember specifically, but there were a couple other things that she had said to me that like, she was starting to put pressure on me to, in hindsight, I can look at this and I can say it now, even though I knew it at the time, like, it annoyed me, but I didn't want to, like, admit it. She was just covering her butt, to, like, because if something was wrong, and her license would be on the line as a midwife, and if she didn't, have me do the proper testing according to who says that it needs to be done, then she could have gotten in trouble. Even though I'm the one who is responsible for taking my own set of risks. I'm the one who determines that. But in a medical setting, then the midwife is the one who determines your risk and what they're willing to, personally take on as your provider. So just those last few weeks, that kind of stuff. And then, just other small things that annoyed me. But it was at that point, like, every time I sat down, it was like I could feel the baby's head touching the seat. Like, it was already that low. So I was like, look, I know for a fact that this baby is fine. He's just sitting really low. Like, it's fine. So we moved past that point, and I had appointments up until 40 weeks, and then, yeah, because I had my appointments on Friday, so I think I was, like, 40 weeks, like, just, like, 40 weeks in a couple days when I had my last appointment, and then I went into labor at 40 weeks and 5 days.
It's pretty similar.
Amidst, everybody being, everybody at that time being like, so when's the baby gonna come? How long until the baby is here? And me being like, whenever the baby wants to come. I don't know.
People hate
because
that.
no one in the sphere around. Yeah. Whenever, for almost the entirety of my pregnancy, I refused to give people a due date because, like, I know that that's dumb. Like, it doesn't matter. But you know, all the women around me that my family more so than anyone that was exposed to home birth were living in Georgia at the time. I was in Tennessee when I gave birth to him, and so none of the women around me had ever experienced anything like that. Even though I was taking a more medicalized version of home birth, no one had home births themselves, except for one friend that I had that had just moved from Kentucky, and so she was the only one who was familiar with that sort of scenario. And all the older ladies at church were constantly like, "When is the baby gonna come?" And you're like, "Whenever the baby wants to come." Yeah, but like, when is it actually gonna be here? I literally just told you, I don't know. And so, because my mother-in-law knew my due date, which is just 40 weeks, she would then tell people, "Oh, well, it's May 4th. I'm like, "No, it's not May 4th. You can't guarantee that as much as you can guarantee that God's not going to come back tomorrow." Like, so. Anyway, I digress.
Yes. People hate that answer. They're like, it's not sufficient for them. They need a day. Like, people would be like digging for like a better answer. I'm like, dude, I gave you an answer. But apparently they think that babies run on a clock and a schedule. So I can relate.
Anyone who has babies should know that they don't run a clock or a schedule. Even after they're here, you're on their clock and their schedule. Like,
yeah. So talk to the people. So you said you went to labor 40 weeks and some change. Did you, because I know some women will describe having like a feeling in their body or like a change mentally that goes on a couple days before they're going to go into labor. They'll say like they like went into labor land a couple of days before, like noticing some changes. Did you notice any of that? And if not, then you can get into your labor story, your birth story.
I wouldn't necessarily say I noticed any specific changes. I mean, I was definitely at the point of pregnancy where I was just like feeling like a beached whale and ready for the baby to be here. I took off of work the week before I started my maternity leave that I never went back for. I started my maternity leave the week before he was born. So like, I was 40 weeks on a Friday, but I started my maternity leave the Monday before. So I had that entire week off leading up to 40 weeks just to prepare the house and to make freezer meals and just get everything in order that I needed to take care of. And then also just to rest, because at that stage of pregnancy, like, you don't want to do anything. And I would hate to be the person who is like working the day up until I go into labor. Could not be me. So, yeah, I took that week off just to prepare. And then, the next week, Monday, nothing happened. Tuesday, and I think at about Monday, I was like, okay, I've been off of work for a week now. Like, this baby can come anytime. My stuff is done. Like, where are you at? And so Tuesday morning, I remember sleeping in till like 10 or 11 or something. And I remember feeling really lazy doing that because I was like, oh, I could have got up and I could have done stuff. But I feel like my body knew what was about to happen, and it was giving me a little extra rest in the morning to prepare for it. So the course of the day went on, and then my husband in the summertime, he works an office job from home, and then in the summertime, while we were still living in Tennessee, he would help his dad with lawn care. So he was after work going to go mow some lawns, and I have in previous times helped him do that. He'll weed eat and I'll ride the mower. But I don't think I had done it at all while I was pregnant. But I begged him to let me get out of the house that day. And it was a beautiful day. It was May 9th. It was gorgeous early spring. And he turned me down at first. He was like, "You cannot ride the mower. You are 40 and a half weeks pregnant." And, like my belly is huge. And I was like, "No, please let me go with you. I just want to get out of the house." And so he ended up letting me go with him after I begged him enough. And so then I conned him into it while we were out there to let me drive the mower. So I mowed 5 lawns on a 0 turn at 45 weeks pregnant. And I think that's what did the trick, to be honest. The little like bouncing on the mower. I think that's what, he was like, "Okay, it's time to get out of here. This is too bouncy inside." So mowed 5 lawns, and then wasn't feeling like cooking dinner. We went and got some Zaxby's, picked up our raw milk because it was a Tuesday, and then we went home, fiddled around the house for a while, and then we got into bed. And probably within like 10 minutes of us getting into bed, right at around 11:15, I felt this like not like a period cramp, but it was in the top of my belly, and I had not had any Braxton Hicks. I had not had any sort of prodromal labor leading up to that. I had felt nothing. So this was the first sensation of any kind that I had experienced. So as soon as I felt something, I was like, that's interesting. And I waited. I didn't say anything. And then about 10 minutes later, another one came. And so I rolled over and I looked at him in the bed and I was like, "I think I just had 2 contractions." And he's like, okay. And so I like laid there and was waiting, and then a few more came. And I waited about an hour, and they would come like every 10 minutes. So after about an hour, I knew like, okay, labor is starting. And by that point, it was after 12. It was after midnight. My mom, who lived 4.5 hours away, she was going to be there with me whenever the baby was born. I had asked her to be there. And so I called her. It was like 1 o'clock her time. She didn't answer. I called like 3 other people that were in the house. My dad, I called my one sister. She didn't answer. And finally I got a hold of one of my 3 sisters that were living at home at the time. And, it's 1 o'clock in the morning for them. And she's like, "Hello?" And so I woke her up. She went and woke up my mom. So then at that point, my whole family knew that I was in labor in the middle of the night. And so she immediately hopped in the car. And so she took her drive up there to Tennessee, about 4.5 hours, because she wanted to make sure that she was gonna get here in time. And so I laid in bed for a little while trying to fall back asleep, because I was like, if I could just fall asleep, get some rest, then it'll be, a lot better. I'll sleep through some of it. But because I had not experienced anything up until that point, I was so excited that I was feeling something. I could not fall asleep. Sleep was not in the cards for me that night. So finally I told Caleb, I was like, "I'm just going to get up. There's, it's a couple dishes that were in the sink that I needed to do." So, and I had wanted to, while I was in labor, as a means of kind of distracting myself, I had wanted to make a sourdough birthday cake for the baby so that we would actually have a birthday cake on the birthday, because that's like your only actual birthday. Every other year is the anniversary of your birthday. So I was like, I wanted to have a birthday cake on his birthday. So I went downstairs. I forgot about the birthday cake, was washing the dishes, and I just would kind of like lean over the sink every time I would have a contraction. And I started to time them on my phone. And pretty quickly, within like 2 hours of the initial one that was at 11:15 on Tuesday night, um, they were getting really close. They were, jumping to like 5 minutes apart, and then not long after that, they were like 3 and 4 minutes apart. So they were coming on fairly quickly, and they would last about 45 seconds. And then I was like, well, I don't want to time them because then that's gonna, get me like too analytical about it and too in my head. And so I quit timing them, and I wasn't really sure what was happening. But then I came back upstairs, and Caleb had been sleeping for a couple hours. And I told him, I was like, hey, I want to get the bed ready. So I had not, decided, oh, I want to like have a water birth or have a land birth. I have always loved water as a pain reliever. So I knew I at least wanted to labor in the water, but I didn't have a preference on where I birthed. So we got the bed ready. We put the sheets on, put the tablecloth, put the second set of sheets on, and then, made sure I had like a little birth kit, with like the cord tie, and hydrogen peroxide and, like wipes and things like that, and some towels and pads and stuff like that. So we made sure we had that accessible to us. And I had, like, the week before, while I was preparing to go into labor, I had put up some string lights and some birth affirmations that I had made. And I had one set that was like just sayings, and I had those around my bed, and then I had another set that was different scriptures, and I had those around our bathtub with string lights. And those actually ended up being a very relied upon source of strength during labor. Like, being able to just look around me and read scripture was like so uplifting and gave me so much hope in moments where I was like really feeling, I couldn't do it anymore. But I told him, I was like, I want to fill up the tub because it's starting to get kind of intense. And up until that point, it didn't really hurt. It was just, a muscle contraction. Just like you would contract your bicep, like you can feel this tension, but it doesn't hurt. It might get sore if you hold it for too long, but you can just hold. It's a muscle contraction. Same thing with your uterus. And so it had been kind of like fine up until that point, and then got into the bathtub, started to get pretty intense, and then I think I got in the shower, and it really picked up in the shower, and so I would like hold on to the door handle, and like squat down and just let my weight hang on the door handle. I was so sure that I was going to like break the glass door because of all the pressure I was putting on it. And then like the shower was like hitting me on the back, kind of relieving some tension there. But that was probably about 6 o'clock in the morning, 5:30 or 6. And at that point, I was sure that this baby was coming soon. And so I had this dream like weeks before that I had gone into labor right before we went to bed, and then I was able to like sleep through most of the labor, and then I woke up really early right before the sun came up, and in like 45 minutes the baby just like came out, and the midwife wasn't there, and like I had this baby girl, and it was just, we were just like snuggling in the bed, and it was just beautiful and like perfect. So here I am in the shower, started labor right before I went to bed, didn't sleep, but now I'm in the shower. It's like 6 o'clock in the morning, the sun's about to come up, and it's getting really intense, and I'm feeling like, oh man, this baby's about to come. this is exactly what I dreamed. And so I told my husband, I was like, text the midwife, like, tell her to go ahead and come. She had like a little over an hour drive. And I was convinced that I was transitioning and that I was going to have the baby before the midwife got there within the next hour, hour and a half. And it was going to be exactly like my dream. That was what I was thinking while I was in the shower. And lo and behold, that did not happen. But yeah, so an hour later, the baby's not there. The midwife shows up, and my mom showed up like 10 minutes after her. And so now everybody is here. And then it was like,
sorry, I have a question. I didn't want it to lag in between.
No, you're fine. I thought you were like needed to say something, but yeah, go ahead.
So looking back now, do you think that calling the midwife, having her arrive, and your mom arrive, did that disturb you at all? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah, how did you feel?
As soon as they got there, they spaced. As soon as they got there, my contractions spaced. And, like, enough to where I got out of the shower, I put on a nightgown, and I had not been able to talk through the contractions that I was having whenever I told my husband to call her. And then as soon as they got there, they, like, not only did the time of them space apart, but the intensity went away. And so, like, then I was able to talk through my contractions. And I mean, I know, like, you have ebbs and flows of labor. All of it is progress. Yep. But, like, I knew that I had just messed myself up. And I did the best laboring when I was by myself. And so at this point, it's, you know, like early morning, like 8 or 9 o'clock. I hadn't really eaten much, so I decided to go downstairs. So I like slowly waddled down the stairs, which was not comfortable at all at that point. And so I went down the stairs. I wasn't down there for super long. I think I went out to the yard, had like a few contractions out there. And then came back inside, like ate a snack bar, snapped at my mom and the midwife because I was having a contraction while I was like leaning over the dinner table, and they were like whispering in the background. But just that amount of noise, I was like, stop talking! It just got under my skin. And I remember them both like looking at each other, kind of like grinning side-eye, like, oh man, she's getting us. And so I don't know how long I was downstairs. I mean, it couldn't have been, I mean, it maybe was an hour. I don't know. At that point, I didn't know like what was happening with time. I was totally in labor land, but also I was coherent enough to have a conversation with you in between. And by that point, it was really hurting. I was starting to have labor in my back, but also all over my belly. Like every single muscle in my stomach was just like every time I would have a contraction. And so like all my uterine muscles. It was super intense. Yeah, can't relate to the women who say that they have pain-free births. I understand what they're talking about when they say like, oh, it wasn't painful, it was intense. Yeah. I know what you're talking about because I experienced it too, but I also experienced the pain of it as well. So eventually went back upstairs, And from there through the afternoon, it was just a rotation of the shower, the tub, and the toilet, just around the little, triangle of the three. Um, and so, every time I would get into the tub, it would space my contractions a lot. It would slow it down, but I needed that relief. And so that's why I kept on going back to the tub, because like I knew I didn't have to deal with as much when I was in the tub. Um, and we didn't have a birth pool or like a birth tub. I just had our bathtub. Um, and so I would get in there and they would only come like every 12 to 15 minutes probably. Um, and they hurt whenever they came, but like they were so infrequent, it didn't bother me that much. Um, but I would also, at that point, because I had been awake since 10 o'clock the morning before, I was just totally exhausted. I had been, awake for over 24 hours at that point, in labor for like 15 hours. And I was just getting really defeated. Um, and so looking back, I wish that I would have done more mental preparation for birth. And it's not like I didn't know to do that. I just for some reason thought I had it handled and I didn't. And so I was just really getting mentally and emotionally defeated. And so my husband would come and he would sit in a chair beside me in the bathtub and he would just hold my hand. He would talk with me and then he'd pray with me and I would fall asleep in between contractions just because I was so tired. As soon as I would be done, then I'd fall asleep within a minute, sleep for 15 minutes, however long, and then I'd wake up to the next contraction, and then it was done, and then repeat the cycle. And I remember at one point with those scriptures hanging around me, there was one that I had put in there talking about the seed of the woman crushing the head of the serpent. And, the scripture talks about in the garden where there will be an increase in your pain, in your labor of childbearing, and the serpent will strike your heel, but the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. And I told my husband, I was like, I feel like more than any other moment in my life right now, I can relate to both the sorrow that God experienced whenever he was being nailed to a tree. I mean, certainly I cannot experience the same pain that he did, but it was as close as I think I will ever be able to, relate to that, experiencing the sorrow that he had whenever he had to go to death for us, and simultaneously, trying to remind myself that though what I was experiencing was painful and it was hard, that what I am doing is a part of the mandate of the seed of the woman and of man crushing the head of the serpent. And so what I was doing in labor hurt emotionally, physically, all of the things. But I was also in the middle of pushing back the kingdom of darkness by bringing forth another child into the world who can shine the light of the Lord. And so for me, I was having this, simultaneously, I was having this intense pain in labor, but I was having this deeply spiritual experience. And I felt closer to God in that moment than I ever have in my life. And I feel like I've had a lot of close to God moments, but I could tell you without a doubt, walking away from that experience in birth, that is the closest that I've ever felt and the most tangible that I have ever felt the presence of the Lord. Which I loved that about my birth, because I I like to say that motherhood is hard and holy. Um, and I think birth is the initiation of that. Birth is hard, but birth is holy. It is a holy experience. Um, we get to experience the very same thing that Mary, the mother of Jesus, did whenever she brought him into the world, and she pushed back the kingdom of darkness whenever, the Christ was born. And we as believers are a part of that as well. And so, like, having that experience just, like, it makes me emotional even talking about it now, because I don't like really think about that often, but whenever I do, it makes me emotional, because like being able to participate in that is something that I cherish very deeply. Um, yeah.
Um, did you have, because I know when I was in transition and she was like 40 minutes away from being born, I was about to puke myself, poop myself, all the things. Like it was coming out of both ends. It never happened, but it was like my body was about to. So did you experience any vomiting or I know a lot of women shake in transition. I know it's intense. Did you notice like the level of intensity in transition, or was it like a gradual building up?
Honestly, I would say it was more gradual. I have a hard time delineating that because I would say from probably 2 o'clock in the afternoon onward, and he was born at 11:30 that night. Um, I was just asleep in between almost every single contraction, um, except for a certain period of time, which I guess is what I would probably consider transition. Um, but I didn't I couldn't tell how long it was in between them, and like everything. I just woke up and I was in pain, and then I would go back to sleep, and then woke up again in pain. So it was like hard to say like, okay, well this is this, if you're like analyzing it from a time, standpoint. But um, I did, if I was to like say when I went through transition, um, it would have been about 2 hours before I had him, and I had earlier in the afternoon. My husband knew I did not want any cervical checks the entire time. I know that they don't do anything. They don't tell you anything. It's ridiculous. Um, but I was at such a mentally defeated point that I was like looking to cling to literally anything. And so I told him, I was like, have the midwife come in here and I would like for her to check me. And he like looked at me like, are you sure that you want me to tell her that? And I was like, don't ask questions, just do it. And so he's like, okay. And so she came in there. I was in the bathtub at that point, and she had asked me, she's like, well, if you lay on the bed, it'll be easier. I was like, I'm not moving out of the tub. If you can't check me here, then don't check me at all. I was like, but I'm asking you to check me, so figure it out. And so she did a cervical check, and I think I set my expectations very low. So I was like saying, okay, at least a 4, and she told me a 6, and so I was like, okay, that makes me feel a little bit better. Um, and just because in everyday life I am an analytical person, so I felt like I wanted to be analytical about it in birth, even though there's no need, like you can't be. It's just like I wanted, it's part of my nature, and um, so I had her check me, and then like 5 hours later, when nothing had happened, I had her check me again. And at that point, it was like, she said, 7, stretchy 8. And I was like, oh, great. Like, so not that much has happened. And she's like, well, we'll call it an 8. And I was like, okay. But then she, yeah. So then she told me that I had a cervical lip. And, yeah, I know.
If you can see my face.
You're allowed.
You're
allowed to roll your.
I hate when midwives say that. Oh my gosh. Sorry.
I know, but here's the thing. Here's the thing that is like, I know that like cervical lip doesn't mean anything. It just means your cervix isn't out of the way yet.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so easy whenever you have put yourself in a position, even knowing those things, to allow somebody else to take any level of authority in that space, because you're so focused. Like, you can't, like, you're not thinking about anything else.
Yeah.
So it's so easy to just like hand that over and be like, okay, well, maybe she's right. Maybe I do have a cervical lip, and just like outsource that in the middle of a very intense moment that you're not wanting to think about anything. Yeah. So whenever she said that, I was just like, okay, whatever. And she's like, I'm going to hold the cervical lip down while you push. And I let her.
Oh my gosh.
Through like 2 or 3 contractions. And it was HE double hockey sticks. It did not feel good. And yeah, so yeah, but I mean, the crux of the matter is like, I knew better, and then I still let her convince me that that was the case, because I'm in the middle of labor, and you know, and then I let her put her fingers inside and hold a cervical lip out of the way. So there's that aspect of that. And so then, you know, okay, well, the cervical lip is out of the way now, which was really her trying to help me make some progress, I guess. Even though, yeah, I won't go down that road. But a couple hours after that, when seemingly nothing else had continued to happen, I had two cervical checks, had her hold a cervical lip out of the way, and then I was sitting on the toilet, and so like my body was doing so much work on the toilet. There's so much happening on the toilet. I did start to feel a little nauseous. I never vomited. I don't even know that I ever pooped either. I don't think I did. But I actually, maybe I did. I can't remember. But I think I maybe had a bowel movement like while I was on the toilet. And that was the point where my husband is like sitting in front of me in a chair. I'm on the toilet facing him. We're like forehead to forehead with each other. He's holding my hands, and I'm looking at him like, cut it out of me. I'm done. Just get it out. Whatever you have to do, just get the baby out. And so that's what I identify as being transition, because like that's the time when most women say things that they don't actually mean. And, you know, you're just like, act like you're going crazy. And I felt like I was going crazy. And I shortly thereafter got back into the bathtub. And I told my husband, I was like, if something does not happen in the next 5 minutes, I want her to break my water. Because I was just so mentally done that I was throwing all of my convictions to the wind. And like all the things that I knew, all of my understanding about birth, I was just like, forget it. Who cares about no interventions? Just get the baby out. So, like, I completely understand why any woman who births in a hospital would birth on drugs. 100% get it. If I was in that environment, I would have done the same thing. Yeah, I totally understand why. And because it's so much easier to disassociate than it is to actually force yourself to face the reality of what you're doing. You want to run away from it. And I was trying so hard to run away from it. And so I was like, I would break my water. And so she comes into the bathroom and she's looking at me and we're having this conversation. There's the same thing again. Thumbs up. She's looking at me and she's like, are you absolutely positive that you want me to do this? And I was like, yes, just do it. And she's like, okay, well, let's wait one more contraction. And then after that one, then we'll do it. The next contraction, my water broke. And I feel like that was just the Lord picking me up out of my pit. Yes. And him being like, I don't even understand why you ever doubted me. But, you know, like, I had gotten to the point where I was so done that I was begging for the midwife to break my water manually, that God was like, okay, I see you. Let me show you that, like, I'm still in control of this. And after that, I think, like, everybody in the room almost wanted to, like, clap. Like, woohoo! So, definitely renewed hope at that point. That was about 9:30 at night. And that was what I consider my transition. And then I ended up getting out of the bathtub and going and laying on the bed. Tried several different positions. Ended up on my back. Like, trying to maybe get some rest. Which I guess I did get rest because I was, like, literally passing out in between contractions and just, like, sleeping and then waking right up into the next one. Like, even more dramatically than I had been over the course of the day to that point. To where, like, at one point I said something to my husband. He was like, no, you literally just had 2 contractions, like, a minute and a half apart from each other. And I was like, are you serious? He's like, yes. And I did not know, like, I didn't realize that because I was just immediately going to sleep in between them. I had no sense of time at that point. But I was just so physically exhausted that I could not stay awake in between them. So that led up to probably the last 30 minutes of me being in labor, which is whenever, you know, we got down to brass tacks and got the baby out finally.
I do want to say, and this is nothing against you, and I think you would agree with me, but your water does not have to break for your baby to be born. My little baby, she's down here, I had nothing. My waters didn't break. I had no blood, no fluid, no nothing. I was in labor, and I didn't have anything come out of me until she was out of me.
I 100% agree with you. And honestly, I think that in the moment, I had internalized something that my mom had told me, which was that with all of her babies, she had to have her water broken by the midwife because the baby would be, like, right there and the baby just wouldn't come out. And then as soon as the midwife would break open the bag, then it would release, you know, it would put more pressure and then the baby would come out within, like, 10 or 15 minutes. So, like, I had conversations with my mom about that before I was in labor, and, you know, I knew how I felt felt about that and was like, okay, like that's not really true. That just means that you didn't wait to see what happened. And I think that like subconsciously that showed up while I was in labor.
Yeah.
And when I was looking for something to like blame the reason why I wasn't progressing, then I was like, oh, well, I just need to have my water broken, and that will make it where the baby comes faster. That was what I guess convinced myself of. But yes, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. And I don't blame women. Like, I went through it myself, and I understand how easily you can be swayed by everybody's opinion. And that was part of the reason that I wanted a free birth, because, I mean, the main reason was I didn't want to be disturbed, and I don't think that people need to be watching you have your baby unless you want them there. So that was the main reason. But also I knew that I would get to a place where people commenting or saying things, I knew that was going to affect me. And me and you were just talking about this last night on our own private conversations, having about live streaming your birth. Like, whether you think it affects you or not, if 10,000 people walked in your front door and went to your room and watched you oh my gosh, like, you would close up, your cervix would be, no, not having this baby. Like, I know it's different, but also there is still people there watching you. And if you're interacting with the live stream, like, like how many people are watching. Some women will comment back to the commenters in labor, and I don't understand it. But you're in such, birth is so vulnerable, so intimate, so easy to mess up, but also it's so resilient in the fact that it can withstand so many interventions. So I think it can be both at the same time. But yeah, I don't blame women. I can understand how easy it could be to want to find something to hold on to and be like, well, this is the reason that things were going slower than I expected. So don't blame women. I can totally understand. But also that's when you need the right support, because they're in their critical thinking mind and you are in your birth mind. So that's why I think it's really important, especially and I think it's sad when the midwives take advantage of that, because they know the mom, like, they can see the mom is, I don't want to say not in her right mind, because I don't think women are like in this hysterical, like they can't make decisions. But they are in a different mindset, and so easily influenced. So I think it's really sad when midwives try to take advantage and stir the little finger in the pot. But this is not my...
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why they call it labor land. You're not entirely lucid. Like, you're conscious, you're there, but like your body is just in such specific focus on what you're experiencing that, like, you're not going to have the most rational thought, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I completely understand what you're saying. It's so easy for medical providers to see that, and then especially those who have not, really been around or seen physiological birth truly. They've only seen it managed or, like, intervened with to pathologize things and to diagnose something that's happening in your birth and be like, well, this is happening, or you have a cervical lip, blah, blah, blah. But the only reason why you would know that there's a cervical lip, which is literally just the cervix not being fully open, is if you have your fingers inside of a woman's body during labor, which is completely unnecessary. But here I found myself in an environment that I had created, and I had initially, hired this midwife with the intention of, well, that's just how you do home birth. And then halfway through my pregnancy, come to realize about unassisted birth and free birth and being like, absolutely, yes, this is what I want. But then feeling that tug of war of, well, okay, I've already paid her thousands of dollars. I feel obligated to have this person present. And so then inviting somebody into my birth space I knew I didn't want there, as soon as she arrived, it impacted my labor. And because my body responded to that, because I knew I didn't want her there. And then, just like you said, even words are the things that people speak to you being an intervention in your labor, because the mind is so powerful and it can latch on to things that are spoken to us. And so, it might not be a cervical check, or it might not be an episiotomy, but simply just somebody saying something while you are in labor to insinuate that something happened or that is the case, then your brain can take that and create the story that, oh, I need this because of this. And, medical providers are really good at creating these narratives and these scenarios that are not really true. And then it's easy for me, the laboring woman, to be like, well, okay, I'll just take your word for it because I don't have anything else to really go off of in the middle of labor, so yeah.
And it is their fault. It is the medical provider's fault that they intervene and do all the unnecessary things. But I have sympathy for them in the fact that that's what they're taught. They're taught that, oh, I'm saving this poor woman. I'm saving her by putting my fingers in her. I'm going to save her. Which is so dumb. But that's what they're being taught, and they think that they're helping women. So I have sympathy, and I also have anger for it as well.
No, I completely understand what you're saying. I mean, they definitely have the savior complex.
Yeah.
And that is what they're taught. But simultaneously, I can say for at least myself, I 100% take personal responsibility on the fact that I invited somebody willingly into my birth space that I knew I didn't want there.
Yeah.
And that is on me. So I created for myself the environment to introduce these problems effectively. And that is a big regret that I have concerning my labor. I don't know how it would have gone otherwise if she was not there, because I don't have that experience. I can't say what that would have looked like, or if it would have been any different than what happened. But I do know that if the midwife wasn't there, I would not have had cervical checks. If I wanted to check myself, then certainly I could have. Yeah. And I could have done that in the moment as well, but I chose not to. Mm-hmm. I outsourced that. And, so if she wasn't there, then I wouldn't have had cervical checks unless I wanted to do them myself. I would not have been diagnosed with a cervical lip that didn't really exist. And I would not have been told 17 minutes before I pushed the baby out that, well, if you really are just, it seems like you're having, I don't think she said I'm having a hard time, but because I was just so exhausted, if you're having maternal exhaustion, if we need to transfer to the hospital, then it's better for us to do it sooner rather than later, because the longer that we wait, then the less likely they are to, be do less interventions and things like that. They'll approach it more holistically if we could go in sooner. They'll want to take more drastic measures the longer that we wait. And so this is 17, I have this on video camera, so I know it's 17 minutes before he was born. And my response to her, even being 23, almost 24 hours into labor, or exactly 24 hours into labor, actually, 24 hours into labor, my response to her was, if you think that you are going to have me walk down the flight of stairs and go get in a vehicle in the state that I am, then you have lost your mind. Because I knew better than anyone that even though I was completely exhausted, everything was still okay. There was nothing wrong. And I still had the fortitude and the ability within myself to get this baby out. Because I did. 17 minutes later, clearly I wasn't so exhausted that I couldn't push my baby out and then stay up for 3 more hours postpartum before we finally fell asleep. So, yeah, that was what the last 15 minutes of my birth looked like. I, like I said, I was on the bed, and then he said that to me, and I was just like, absolutely not. You're crazy if you think that's going to happen. If 2 hours ago I was asking for my husband to cut it out of me, which, is obviously a surgical procedure, but that was just the crazy thing I was saying because, like, I knew, my husband knew, everybody else knew, like, the hospital is not going to happen. Like, that's just not an option, and there's nothing wrong. I knew that nothing was wrong. And so I ended up getting off of the bed. My husband was sitting in a chair just to the side of the bed that I sleep on. And I wrapped my arms around his neck and while I was facing him, wrapped my arms around his neck, and I squatted, like in this deep squat in front of him. And I had been pushing already for probably 2 hours, because I had been, like, feeling it felt better to push through the contraction. And so he had been crowning for, like, a while. When I say crowning, like, you could see his head in the vaginal canal, but he wasn't, like, right at the edge. So, like, I knew something was happening, but I just, I was so tired. I was getting rest in between. Then she says this to me, and I was like, actually, let me just go ahead and show you that I can get this done. So I get up, squat in front of my husband, and I pushed for 5 minutes, I think, after that, by the time I got into that position. And his head came out, and then 7 seconds later, which it felt like all at the same time, experiencing it, his body shot out right after that. And I was kind of expecting his head to come out, and then it wait, and maybe have another contraction, and then push his body out, but I mean, it was like all at the same time. He just flew out like a lightning bolt. And so I fell back on the floor, and I just started like, just like sobbing and crying, and lifted him up to me, I was crying, and we had not found out what we were having the whole time. And so about a minute and a half later, after I'm exclaiming, oh my goodness, it's so cute, and just like holding my baby, and all like the oxytocin is just like flooding you, after 24 hours and 15 minutes of labor and excruciating pain at times, and you feel like I've been passing out in between contractions, and then all of a sudden that hormone hits you, and you're just like alert and awake, and just like so in the moment. Nothing like I've ever experienced before in my life. It's incredible. And if not, but for that moment alone, I would do it over and over and over and over again. I loved that after birth high. It was amazing. And so like a minute and a half later, I thought to check and see, and so I looked, and it was a boy. So I was like, it's a boy. And my mom, she's in the background of the video, and she's like, I told you! Like, because she was convinced the whole time that it was a boy. I said I didn't know, and then I had dreamed that it was a girl. Clearly I wasn't right. But, so we had a boy, for him having suspected intrauterine growth like 3 weeks before. He was 8 pounds and 7 ounces. Clearly not a growth restricted baby by any means. And he was 22 inches long, which is the longest of any of the babies in mine or my husband's family. So all the other babies are like 20 or 21 inches. So like they look pudgier, but he looked skinnier because he, like, even though he was almost 8.5 pounds, he was long. So like he looked so little. And then he chunked up so fast. Oh my goodness. He surpassed his birth weight in like 3 days. He chunked up super fast. But yeah, so we were sitting on the floor. My placenta came out in like 10 minutes afterward. And then postpartum.
That could be a whole nother conversation. So, gosh, I could go. I don't want to like spew my opinions on your birth or like anything. Like, this is your birth, and I just want to let you tell your story.
No, it's okay.
I don't want to
say whatever you want to say.
Okay. I just want to comment on that. I think it's really admirable of you that you were able to come out of it and objectively see it for what it was, and not, because I see a lot of women come out of their birth and hold on to stories that may or may not be true as to what happened. Especially when they have midwives attending. So I think it's really admirable of you that you were able to experience it and also see what you would have done differently, and not like go to bat for your midwife. Like, no, what she did was right, and like I'm going to defend her to the T. So I think that's really awesome that you can distinguish the two and still learn from it, because I know I learned from my birth, even though nobody was there. I still definitely had lessons learned in my birth.
Which honestly, I'll go to bat for her in the sense of she really only did what I asked her to do.
Right.
And it was just her presence of being there that like allowed me to hand over my responsibility in the birth, and then ask for these things that I otherwise would have never, like, that I didn't want and otherwise would have never had. But because I had that accessibility, I was like, well then, okay, here, you can do this. Let me ask you to do these things that I know I don't want. And then, you know, she followed through on that. So in that sense, I will go to bat for her. Like, she wasn't just pushing me to do these things. It was me handing over to her the ability to do it.
So how was your first night? I know, okay, a lot of women are like, I hear the story going around of I don't know what they call it, like the first night or the second night, like terror or something. They call it like this horrible thing that happens a day or two after your baby's born, where they like freak out, they're screaming all night, like it's an awful experience. I personally did not have that. We just slept. So I don't know if that's what you experienced or if it was how it was for you.
No, I didn't have that. He was born at 11:30 Wednesday night, so 24 hours 15 minutes after I went into labor. Um, and um, we weighed him and snuggled with him and put a diaper on him. He latched right away. He nursed fantastic. Um, the midwife had even commented when she was doing like the newborn assessment. She was like, almost. You can bring her in here if you want to. Um, I'm getting a baby delivery, I think.
Sorry, so it's going like longer than normal.
Otherwise, he's gonna get into. No, it's fine. I mean, I think I've done most of the talking, so I've made it really long. But yeah, when she did the newborn assessment, she like had her finger in his mouth to like feel like the latch and the suckle, and she's like, he will not let go, and he would not let go of her finger. He was just like suckling so hard, and finally he unlatched, and then he latched on me at the breast, and he just like nursed, and he did amazing. So breastfeeding went very smoothly. We had a couple small hiccups like a couple weeks afterward, but nothing that wasn't manageable. And he's just a couple weeks shy of being a year now, and he still is breastfeeding, which I love. It's such a beautiful relationship, and I would not trade it for anything. But yeah, we got him diapered up. I think I got through the shower, and I did pass out getting off the toilet. Yeah, I went pee, and then I
said it is not uncommon. I was listening to, you heard it, the Hemorrhage on Free Birth Society episode. Like, it is not uncommon. It's not something to be fearful of. Of course, if there's like other signs indicating that things are like wrong, I would like keep that in mind. Be watchful of that. But you just went through like such a huge thing. Like, of course, your body is going to have some reactions. And if you are moving a lot afterwards,
absolutely,
that is a common experience that a lot of women have, is lightheadedness or fainting. So I don't think it's something to be scared of. Sorry.
I agree completely. No, you're good. There are a lot of people who would see a woman passing out immediately postpartum and like immediately label that as hemorrhage.
Yeah.
But that's not the case. And for me, this was a couple hours actually after I had him, and I had been sitting in the bed for that whole period of time, and then I got up, I got through the shower, and then I sat down on the toilet to go pee, and then whenever I stood up, the next thing I knew, I was waking up, and I don't know how long I was. I said like a half a minute. I was out for very long, but I had apparently just fallen over because I woke up, and all I could see underneath my bathtub, and I could see the tile floor, and then I like rolled my head over, and I could see these people above me, and it was like I didn't know who they were, and like I didn't know like what had just happened. And then it took me about like 10 or 15 seconds, and then like it all like my brain started moving again, and then I was like, oh, okay, I just had a baby. That's my husband. Like I saw this man and like didn't know it was my husband for like a split second, and then so they like kind of slowly lifted me up and just sit here for a second, and then they helped me to the bed. But yeah, it was I did not have any excessive blood loss or anything like that. It was was just my body reacting to having lost blood because of birth and, going through a long period of stress. And then I quickly got up off of the toilet. And so, my body reacted accordingly.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like I was not scared by that when it happened. It was just kind of like, oh, wasn't expecting it. And so, yeah, I got into and this was probably 3 or 4 hours after he was born. And then we fell asleep, and we actually slept really great at night. Didn't get a ton of sleep. Like, we got maybe like 4 or 5 hours because, newborns, they'll sleep a longer period of time than they will moving forward. Then they'll, go short to like 2 or 3 hours throughout the night, waking up. But those first like 4 to 5 hours that we slept, that immediate postpartum, was glorious. And then that would have been Thursday morning by that point. And my sisters, I have 4 sisters and a brother. All my sisters ended up coming up between Thursday and Friday, and my brother came. And so it was actually, that Sunday was Mother's Day. It was Mother's Day weekend. And so on Mother's Day, I was like 4 days postpartum, and I had my entire family, all 5 of my siblings, all of their spouses, their kids, my mom, my dad, my husband, my husband's parents, and we had an entire house full. It was chaos, but we had this beautiful Mother's Day dinner, and because I was on bed rest, I didn't go down the stairs to our dining room. My mom had decorated it in there, and they all had their dinner, and so she brought up a plate to me, and so I ate my Mother's Day dinner with a little tray in bed, snuggling my newborn baby, and it was just so lovely. And I know for some people that would probably be really chaotic, but I've grown up with a big family, and so I'm used to a lot of the noise and all the people. So it was, and having been away for, 4.5 years at that point, living away from my big family, it was really nice to have that, because we had been quiet with just the 2 of us in our house for all that time. So having my big family there and being able to celebrate this new initiation into motherhood just days before was really, really sweet, and a super precious moment that I will always, always remember and hold in my heart, like I said. So
that's beautiful. I'm so glad that you enjoyed, even though it was hard, I'm so glad you enjoyed it and that it's a fond memory that you look back on. So is there anything that you want to say to the women? Encouragement maybe for mothers coming up on their birth, or you don't have to, just.
I would say if you are pregnant, you're coming up on your birth, whether it's your first one or it's your 10th one, just be reminded that the mental work is the biggest work. And also that if you allow it to be, birth can be, it is, regardless, it is incredibly sacred and it is incredibly holy. But if you allow it to be, it can be a wonderful spiritual experience. And I think that the presence of God should be present there with you. He is with you always, but you should allow the presence of God to be there where you can feel it in the middle of all of that. And I think you will be far better off for it on the other side of your birth and your labor, because that's not something I would ever want to go through without experiencing the presence of the Lord. It is hard and it is holy, and just being able to be open to having that spiritual experience with God whenever you go through that. He will keep you through it. Praise the Lord.
Well, thank you for sharing. I know it went way longer than our normal episodes, but I love listening to long birth stories, so I love it. But thank you for sharing, and we will hopefully do mine soon. We want to bring on my husband because I had a free birth. He was a big part of that. So I think we're going to hopefully do an episode with me and my husband soon, possibly just me telling my birth story, and then separately bringing on my husband to get his perspective, and to talk to the dudes out there. I know a lot of husbands are fearful because they're not educated and they just don't know anything different than what's been taught in the typical hospital birth world and all the things and the Hollywood movies that make it scary and traumatizing. Yeah, hopefully we can have him on soon, and then maybe even Anna's husband in the future. But I'm sure we will talk a lot about birth in the coming episodes.
This is a motherhood podcast, after all.
So I really hope that you all enjoyed listening to Anna's story, and hope you all were encouraged by it and took away lessons and encouragement from her and her strength to go through it. So we will catch you next Friday. We don't know what we're talking about yet. We actually discussed yesterday what we were going to be talking about today, so it's kind of on the fly every once in a while. But we'll catch you next week with a new episode, and both of our Instagrams are in the description. That's all that's in the description is Instagram. Yes. So if you want to follow Anna, she is a birth keeper after all. If you live in the Georgia area and want her to attend your birth, you can go and find her Instagram and Are you linking your birth one or no?
I think I have it in the show notes, yeah. I think I do.
So if you want to contact...
I can. If I don't, I put it.
Okay. But if y'all want to contact her, follow her Instagram for more birth information and education. She has a lot of great resources that I personally love to go through. So thank y'all for listening, and we will catch you next time. Until then, have a good week. Thank you, Anna.
Bye.
Bye.